Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And if you were paying attention to the news this week in particular, but then also over the last several years, you have seen how the weaponization of government has created this completely false structure that is protecting Democrats and preferred individuals on one side, and then specifically targeting the non-preferred or political opposition, according to the regime, and the progressive lefts on the other hand. And we're seeing how Hunter Biden is being treated. We're seeing that the mainstream media isn't even paying attention to Joe Biden. And now that he had this apparently a pen name or a nom de plume that he was writing emails and other things while he was vice president, and the media just doesn't care. No, they're focused on, whether President Trump is going to be behind bars this week, and is he going to have a mugshot and all of this other stuff. And yet this two-tiered system of government is incredibly, incredibly dangerous to liberty and freedom. And someone who's been speaking out prolifically against the weaponization of government is my next guest, Carl Szabo, the Vice President and General Counsel for Net Choice and Professor of Internet Law at George Mason University. And so, Carl, thanks so much for joining me. And I agree that we need to get all of this sorted out before the next election, but how exactly are we going to do that when it seems like all the Republicans do on Capitol Hill, and I have very good friends there, but all they seem to do is put out tweets and very strongly worded letters, and it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of fighting back and accountability that's happening.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And this is one of the big issues that seems to not be discussed by a lot of big media because, well, it's helping to empower the people that they want to see in office, whether it's Joe Biden, whether it is the Democrats writ large, across the board. So what we are seeing is exactly this, the weaponization of government and the ability of government to censor free speech. We saw it a year ago. Most of us remember the Disinformation Governance Board. It was led by Mary Poppins. Fortunately, enough jokes were made about it. It was so absurd. It was so Orwellian. It's the type of thing you see in authoritarian regimes that it fell apart. But it did not stop there. We saw in the last election how the government was looking to make clear that the Hunter Biden laptop was fake and therefore crush all discussion of it. We see it time and time again with social media, as we are discovering. Now, you point out exactly right. Look, Congress, it's tough. It is exceptionally partisan up there on the Hill. I'm up there all the time talking to lawmakers about this. But what we are seeing, there is some good news. We are seeing the Republicans in leadership, people like Jim Jordan, people like James Comer, bring to light this coercion, this pressuring of social media to censor content. We are seeing it in the Twitter files. We are seeing it in round and round of Facebook files. And we are seeing it in the introduction of legislation. Now, this is one of the important parts. We are seeing legislation that was passed this session from Jim Jordan, passed out of the House. It was called the Protecting Free Speech from Government Interference Act. And we are also seeing legislation from James Comer called the Free Speech Preservation Act. And what it does is quite simply, it says to the government, it says to the executive branch, it says to all those government employees who are supposed to be out there working for all Americans, not just Democrats, not just Republicans, but for all Americans. And it says, guess what? You cannot use your political position to pressure, to coerce, to censor social media. And the legislation from Representative Jim Jordan basically said just that. It makes it illegal for government employees to weaponize their political position. And it does so in a way that is actually effective because a lot of government employees may not care if the agency gets besmirched, but this actually goes after the employees' pensions and paychecks. And that's something they most definitely care about. But the unfortunate part, Jenna, as you point out, is that it is exceptionally partisan. And unfortunately, on an issue as simple as government should work for all Americans, the vote was right down party lines. Republicans saying government should work for all Americans, and Democrats saying no, government should not. We don't support those types of laws. And that's the real challenge that we need to overcome.
It is. And I think that the Democrats are acting like they are never going to lose another election again. And there's never going to be a Republican majority again in the House, the Senate, with a Republican president in the White House, with how brazen they are with some of these, not only their pushes for this type of overt censorship of Americans on social media, that what a lot of people called a ministry of truth that you referenced and referred to, and really with their nonchalance with all of this coming out with the Twitter files, with the Facebook files, and the Zuckerbucks that were used in the last election. And then also how that has interplayed now with the Missouri versus Biden case, and how the Biden administration is pushing back and basically just saying, no, we want to be able to tell social media companies how to censor Americans. And so I don't have quite as much faith in the legislative option just because of the composition on Capitol Hill, at least currently. But do you think that maybe a judicial path might have more success?
I very much think so. So one of the scary statistics that I saw recently, and this was really eye-opening, for nearly 200 years, it didn't matter who was in office, but Democrats and Republicans, the precursors of their parties, they all agreed that government should not be deciding what is or is not truth. Government should not be deciding what is or is not allowed to be printed. Government should not be allowed to decide what is or is not said. That was up until just this year. Now, 70% of Democrats support and are calling for government to take steps to restrict false information online, whatever false information happens to be, whether it is discussions of shutting down churches and temples because of COVID, whether it is Hunter Biden laptop. 70% of Democrats now support government restricting false information online, as opposed to just 40% of Republicans, which that number has been pretty consistent across the years. That's terrifying. That's an overwhelming majority of Democrats think government should be in the position to decide what is or is not allowed to be said. And that's where the courts definitely do come into play. NetChoice, my company, we have active litigation against states like California who are trying to decide what type of speech is or is not allowed to be seen or said. We have 3 other lawsuits going on right now, and they are all centered around the First Amendment, because this is what separates the United States of America from most of the rest of the world. We are one of the only nations that makes it crystal clear that the government can not tell us what to say, what to hear, and what religion to practice. And that's an important protection that I think is being lost. So our courts are going to have to be the backstop, because the Founding Fathers put into the Constitution a guarantee of freedom of speech. And that is the firewall that we need to protect us against this type of government control of free speech. I do hope Democrats remember that they will not always control Congress, that they will not always control the White House, that they will not always control the executive branch. And just 5 years ago, they were saying how President Trump was going to seize control of free speech and destroying democracy. Well, guess what? That's the type of attitude they need to have regardless of who's in the White House. That government power needs to be curtailed, and we need to start limiting the executive branch, because at the end of the day, that's where the rubber needs to meet the road. And I'm really empowered by shows like yours that are getting this message out to people, because at the end of the day, we are also in the driver's seat. We need to go to the ballot box. We need to pull the lever for the representatives who will defend our right to speak, our right to hear, and get government out of the role of deciding what is or is not truth.
Really well said. And I'm speaking with Carl Szabo, who is the Vice President and General Counsel for NetChoice and a professor of Internet Law at George Mason University. And I think it's so well said that we need to remember as Americans that this is for all. And one of the things that really disturbs me about some of the pushback against the weaponization of government is that 40% of Republicans that say that we should be able to discriminate and to censor and to say that that the government can determine what is or isn't speech that should be censored online or any of these things. And some of the response has been, in my opinion, an overreaction to say, well, if the left is going to do this to conservatives, then we need to fight back and we need to do the same thing to them. And I'm thinking, no, then we are just helping tear down the foundations of our liberties, and we're helping tear down the First Amendment. We need to get back to being balanced and saying, no, what you're doing is completely against the standard of the First Amendment, and we have to champion the standard, not just this war of tit for tat. Otherwise, I believe genuinely that we are just helping tear down the U.S. Constitution like they want us to.
Yeah, I mean, eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, and that's exactly what we don't want. We need to rise above. A very long time ago, I worked for the federal government, and what was core to me is public service is public trust. When you are a government employee, you need to work for all Americans. And we're seeing this across our institutions, whether it's in the control of speech online, whether it is the weaponization of government like the IRS or the FBI to go after parents in schools, whether to go after churches and synagogues. And so that's what we're seeing across the board here. And if people don't trust the system, that's how governments fail. That's how nations fall. And that's where we need to begin at home, in our communities, rebuilding that public trust. And this starts with having free speech, knowing that when I say something, that somebody isn't going to come in and try to control what I just said or what I can hear. And being able to trust in that system is what will empower us all to rise above it. And what I hope to see is more news agencies, more legacy media come out and recognize the important role of their job as the fourth estate to hold government accountable regardless of who's in office. Because, look, I'm a Republican, I'm right of center, and I often ask myself, how would this be reported if it were a Republican in the White House? And a lot of people are frustrated because they see the partisanship. They see the partisanship on the news. They see the partisanship in the government itself. So what we all need to do is we need to go to our lawmakers and we need to tell them enough. We need to say, get back to the job of fixing the economy. Back to the job of rebuilding our nation and stop trying to control speech online, because all that's going to do is seed more and more distrust in the system. And so that's why we have our active lawsuits to protect the First Amendment, because at the end of the day, that's one of our most precious and powerful and protective things that we can possibly have. And that's what we need. And that's why NetChoice is up there every single day fighting to protect free speech, fighting to protect free enterprise online, and fighting to protect our core First Amendment values in this nation.
And I'm so grateful for organizations like yours that are fighting the fights that need to be fought. Because if we just sit back and either complain or just say, well, nothing is ever going to change, then we aren't advancing and we're not going on the offensive. And, you make also a great point, Carl, that if this was a Republican president in the White House now with all of this collusion with big tech and censorship going on, how would the media report this and how would this be looked at differently? And we all know the answer to that. I mean, even with this latest indictment that obviously I can't comment on because, I'm caught up in it, unfortunately, it is criminalizing the practice of law. It's attempting to criminalize petitioning the government for redress. And, there was a piece in the Atlantic this morning. My good friend Mark Levin was tweeting about it, that a couple of lawyers have written what he calls a self-humiliating piece in the Atlantic, arguing the Constitution, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment prohibits President Trump from being elected president again. And he says this is such a dumb essay. And I'm thinking, yeah, but the response to this is not going after those lawyers' bar licenses for presenting a legal theory, nor the lawyers who tried to challenge the members of Congress under the 14th Amendment, saying that they were prohibited just because they termed January 6th an insurrection. Nobody's going after them and trying to criminalize their practice of law. So we're seeing the disparity of how not only the media, but also our institutions of government and our branches of government treat Republicans versus Democrats so differently. And that is incredibly dangerous for America.
Yeah, once again, we're all Americans, and we need to be able to speak, engage, and have a discussion. And one of the things that we have seen is kind of a breakdown in society, breakdown in religion, breakdown in community. And I think that helps to drive people in different directions. With respect to what's going on with President Trump, at the end of the day, the fact that the media is spending so much time on this is appalling. We literally have huge humanitarian crisis in our country right now in Hawaii. Is receiving no coverage, and all people want to do is talk about President Trump. Will he be indicted today or not? And that's really unfortunate, because that's a time where we should all come together. We should all send our prayers and our hopes to the people of Hawaii and hope they get better. And at the end of the day, I remember when President Bush was lambasted for taking vacation during 9/11.
Yeah, and yet Biden can do the same thing. So it's so ridiculous. And Carl, I definitely want to have you on again soon. There's so much more to talk about. Carl Szabo, Vice President and General Counsel for Net Choice. Thanks so much for what you do. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.